can call all of our friends that are down in Florida and Arizona, February, the snowbirds are called wimps for leaving us. What's it going to be, 50 degrees today? So, a little light as it always is in February because, as I say, only the hardy ones are still here, right? Well, we had a terrific breakfast in January for the hardy ones that were here for that too. Michelle Horowitz, class of '98, told us about her founding and directing of Appetite for Change. Great presentation, and we've got some good ones coming up in March. Blake parent Andy Redleaf is going to be talking to us about his experience as a hedge fund manager. And if any of you have seen the movie The Big Short recently, he's not mentioned in it at all, but he was a player in that game as well, and a very successful player during the financial meltdown. So a very interesting fellow. And then in April, the Philip Otis Environmental Authors Program will be hosting Doug Gayton, who is a filmmaker, a writer, and a photographer, and we'll have a great presentation from him as well. Well, today we have the pleasure of hearing from poet, essayist, and writer Tai Coleman. Tai grew up in Chicago, one of 5 children, raised by their single mother. She went to Iowa State University to earn her bachelor's and her master's in English literature. Then she journeyed north to earn a master's of fine arts in poetry from the University of Minnesota, followed by a PhD in literature and culture. Tai currently teaches in the English department at the Minneapolis Community and Technical College, where she received the Minskew Outstanding Educator Award for 2015. In presenting her award last April, the Minskew Board of Trustees gave Tai this commendation. Coleman knows firsthand that with the support and encouragement of teachers, one can overcome life's challenges and earn an education. Her level of impact is a marvel. She works diligently to support and mentor her students, as well as to make her college a more welcoming and inclusive community. Tai and her husband, Emmanuel Minde, who she met in Tanzania a number of years ago, now have 2 children at Blake, 8th grader Cheryl, who is here today, and Cheryl's little sister, Thelma, who is out at Highcroft in kindergarten. So here to talk about doing your best, my practice inspiring the best from others and myself through my calling as a learner, an educator, a writer, a mother, and a community member is Tai Coleman.
Good morning. Wow, that's good. I didn't have to pull that out. I just want to say how honored I am to be with you this morning, and I just want to thank you for the opportunity to have a discussion with you. And it's so nice to see so many familiar faces in the audience. When I received the invitation to speak today, I was told to speak about some of the reasons why my husband and I selected Blake as the school for our children, but also to tell you a little bit about myself and my work. And I was thinking about how to do that, because as a writer, that's a little bit problematic, because I talk too much, and everybody has permission to say time. I kind of thought maybe the best way to do that would be to talk about who I am, where I'm from, a little bit about my work, and in those narratives, you will find values, right, and ideals that I feel that Blake embodies. And we'll take it from there. As a poet, I'm very tied to imagery and images, so I like photos. So I started with a bowl of spaghetti. Does it look good? My daughter Cheryl is here, who I'm so proud of and I love very much. And I've been sworn not to embarrass her today. But I have to say, as any parent in the room, she is one of my greatest inspirations. So it seems like you think you know everything, but when you have children, it's your children who teach you. So I thought a great way to frame my talk with you today is to start with my daughter and her love of spaghetti. And it started not only after she was born, but the whole 9 months that I was pregnant, it was the only food that I could eat. And so I'll just ask you to remember that. All right. So would you gather this? All right. So, who am I? Can you get a good look at this picture and see, can you guess which one am I? Which one? The two babies. And yeah, I'm gonna ham hock up there, right? And this is from the south side of Chicago, and this is my mom in the middle. My older sister is down there. Notice that she's smaller than me, but she's still the oldest, Sharon. And we're on the front porch, and this is like circa 1970 something. And my mom is originally from a small southern town in southern Illinois, and come out of a tradition of coal miners, manual labor. And she met my father and moved to Chicago, so she's in the middle of the city, and she doesn't know anybody. Not to mention, look at her, right? People couldn't figure out, is she black, is she white, what is she, right? But my mother valued education, and she understood that by having education, we could achieve anything. Although we're very happy in this picture, within the years to come, my mother would be with 5 children, and she would be by herself. But think about the way that she's looking at me and the way that she's holding me. When I did graduate from college with my bachelor's degree, I'll never forget when I walked across the stage, and this is in Ames, Iowa. My mother had on pink neon socks. She came up to me and she kissed me full on the lips like I was a baby. And she said, "You did it." And I was taken aback because I can't remember her kissing me like that. And of course, she was a single parent, right? She loved me dearly, but she was constantly, working. And it was my job then to take care of everyone. I wasn't the oldest, but because I was the biggest, I assumed the role of the oldest. But in that moment of finishing my degree, what she was telling me was that I finally realized what she knew about me all along, that I was capable. And as an educator, I know that that's what we have to give students, right? We have to help them to see what we see in them. And so when I say, who am I am everything that my mother created the foundation for me to be by making sure that I was in the right places that she felt embodied the values of education and how to be a good human being in the world. And in coming to Blake with my children, I was acting in that legacy, in that tradition. So these are my kids, my DNA replicas. And my husband Emmanuel will be here today, but he's with the 4-year-old, so it's their bonding time. So my 4-year-old has learned how to say, "Dad, this is our boy time." So at the bottom there's Dee, and then there's Churro, and then Thelma. And as said earlier, Thelma's at Highcroft, she just turned 6. Cheryl is here, 14, and Dee there is 4 at home. And you can see a little dinosaur there. That's his favorite thing, dinosaurs. And my husband Emmanuel with the babies. I wanted to talk a little bit about my education. And in this picture, I was going through some old photo albums to talk about my journey. Because as an educator, as I'm sure you all know, you never stop being a student. And so this is from Elizabeth C. Academy High School for Girls, Catholic high school, all girl. I'm a product of K through 12 parochial education. So I've always been in a Catholic school. And part of the benefit of that journey that I know now that maybe I didn't kind of think of when I was, 17, because it was all I knew from age 5 to 17, was that it was a community of shared values and beliefs and expectations. So my mother knew that when I left the house, if I were with my teachers, she could expect the same expectations. All of my friends from high school were friends that I had in kindergarten. And so there was this community. There was no question that you were going to college. That was not even an option. It was, this is when you're going to take your ACT. This is when you're going to take your SAT. And so when I came to Minnesota, I wasn't necessarily connected to a church or an archdiocese, but I very much wanted my children to have that experience of having education in a place that fostered community values and beliefs that were shared. And I don't think that that's anything that one should apologize for. I have to say, being a first-generation college graduate on both sides of my family, from the inner University of Chicago, it was probably the strongest thing that motivated me to continue to achieve my goals. And I can tell you it's something that motivates me today as an educator and as a writer. And I do write about it. And there is some privilege to that, right? But as you know, with privilege comes responsibility of service. I am a Ronald E. McNair Scholar. Does anybody know who this man is? You want to tell me? Yes. And who was he? He died. He would have been the first African American male astronaut in space. And what happened to the shuttle? It exploded, right? And as a result, there was a federal funding program established in TRIO in order to increase underrepresented groups for professional degrees. And I am a direct product of that. And I am a recipient of the Ronald McNair Scholarship. And so it's important to honor the legacy of service, right? And so it was important for him to lead. As just think, he's here because I'm here, and think about the countless people he touches, right? And when people touch us, we touch other people by what they do, the legacy. My bachelor's and master's degrees from Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa. Historically, a school based on agriculture, but of course now very much steeped in technology, contracts with the federal government, all that stuff. But it is the place where I was introduced to social justice pedagogy. And think about Iowa, I don't want to stereotype them, right? People often wonder how did the first black president come out of the momentum from Iowa. Well, it totally makes sense to me. They're farmers. All they care about is, do you do the work? Can you carry the weight? And once you do the work, you're in good, right? So not only was Iowa State the place where I earned my bachelor's degree in English with a minor in Spanish, also my master's degree in English, but I also traveled abroad. So I did a semester at the University of Valladolid in Spain, and also spent time in Ireland and London, and kind of developed this view of seeing the world not only from a micro position of myself, but understanding that I was in a global environment, right? That there were these other influences. And that came out of my experience with Iowa State. Also, it's a shameless plug for my alma mater. When I finished my master's degree at Iowa State in 1998, I'm getting old now, I had an opportunity to teach at American College in Dar es Salaam. And Tanzania is in East Africa, right below Kenya and above Mozambique. And in 1998, I traveled there and I taught at that college for 4 months. I was there when they bombed the embassies in Dar es Salaam and in Nairobi, and I've written about that. But it was also the summer I met my husband. So it was a tragedy. I'm not making light of that, but my grandmother called me from a small town in southern Illinois and said, "Get your bleep out of there." And I said, "No, I'm in love." And I stayed for 4 weeks. And then a year later, marriage, betrothal, and here. But just, I want to say about that too. I couldn't imagine how well Iowa State had prepared me to sit in a room with students who were probably recent high school graduates, maybe ranging in the age from 17 to 20 at most. But at a minimum, all of them could speak at least 3 languages. Knew U.S. history up and down better than I did, and could draw maps of the United States that would put me to shame. And I was so honored to be in that space because it was almost a glimpse of the future. If you want to know what the world is going to look like, look at this room, right? And that was exciting. So again, thinking about values, right? Understanding that we live in a global world, languages and communication, those things are important. So I was hooked on living abroad, and I said to myself, like any good scholar or teacher, how can I make that happen again? So I applied for a Rotary ambassadorial scholarship, in which I received, and I did a year of postgraduate work at the University of Dar es Salaam, studying folklore. And it was an interesting story because while I packed up and took a leave of absence from the University of Minnesota, my husband was on a plane coming here. So he actually spent a year here, while I was there a year by myself. I know, the plans don't always work. Right, Jocelyn, we were talking about that. You have to trust the universe. And it was a good experience because had he been there, he probably would have protected me. But because I was there by myself, I saw and did a lot of things that I would never have done. Unfortunately, while I was there, Julius Nyerere, who was the first president of Tanzania, very instrumental in forming SAD and economic unions in South Africa and East Africa, died. And I actually went to view his body. And I don't think had I been there with my husband, he would have let me do it. Because you talk about standing out on lines for days, right? So I had these wonderful, enriching experiences. So when I returned to the University of Minnesota, I did finish my MFA in poetry, and also while I was there teaching. When I finished my MFA, we had a wonderful bundle of joy in 2001, and I realized that I had to get a real job. And so I applied for a job at North Hennepin Community College, and I accepted that job, and that's in the Minnesota State Colleges and University system. And I've been working in that system as full-time teaching faculty since 2002, except for the 2 years that we lived abroad in Guadalajara, Mexico. And so I've taught at North Hennepin, and I'm currently at MCTC in Minneapolis. And part of that work is not just teaching English, it's also about serving the community. And as I'm sure you can imagine, education is transforming in amazing ways, like overnight. Can you imagine that when I was in high school, as I'm sure like you were in high school, that's all you did. Now students are graduating from high school with 2 years of college credit. So we don't say K through 12, you say K through 14, right? Or K through 16. So it's an exciting time to be in the state of Minnesota, to be in the field of education and watching all the transformation that's happening that's allowing more students to have access. I wanted to talk a little bit about my work at the Loft Literary Center. As a poet, coming to the Twin Cities and having the opportunity to be involved with the largest nonprofit literary arts center of its kind in the United States was amazing. And I think still, Minneapolis is tied with Seattle for the most literate city in the United States. At the time, Linda Myers was the director of the Loft, and she earned her PhD from the University of Iowa, and she wrote her dissertation on Toni Morrison, so you know that we were fast friends. But in all seriousness, she was a mentor to me, and she invited me to sit on the board. And it is on the board that not only working with Linda Myers, I met Jocelyn Hill, former director of the Loft, and my daughter was coming of age, and I was wondering, where do I send my daughter? I had been teaching in the MSU system, had a good opportunity to observe the educational process for the students, and I understood at that time, my husband and I, we wanted to have a different type of education for our child. And they were the two that suggested looking at Blake. And they were very instrumental in me applying to this institution. And I'm so thankful and grateful that they did. And one of the reasons why I'm here today. So imagine this theme of service, of networking, of having connections. Here I am connected to the Loft. You're connected to the Loft through your alumni. And here I come through that chain of relationships, right? You can never anticipate the benefit that having relationships and being connected to the community create, but you know that, right? And I'm a direct product of that. I wouldn't be standing in front of you if not for those relationships. So, in being in the Twin Cities, I started publishing, became a member of Con, which is a national workshop for African American poets. I'm there on my right, your left, looking much younger, right? And next to me is Cornelius Eddy, poet, yes, familiar. And right here, we're not with Yusuf Komanyaka. But can you imagine, but all from the connections stemming out of working in Minneapolis and the people that I met in the Loft Literary Center. And as you know, Minneapolis is a great place to be an artist, and it's a great place to be a writer. And one of the reasons why we have remained. My work consists of essays and poems, and my most recent publication will be in a collection titled A Good Time for Truth, edited by Sun Young Shin. who was a fantastic Korean adopted writer in the Twin Cities, and she has edited this anthology by 16 writers of color from the state of Minnesota, talking about the issues of race and the achievement gap. It will be published by the Minnesota Historical Press Society, and we're very excited about the buzz that the book is getting. But also, too, it speaks to what Minnesota can produce when the connections and the relationships are there. So I hope that you will check it out. Most of my writing is about positioning myself, my connection to my students, but also telling my story. Where do you see yourself in the narrative? And I really do believe that the mentors and the writers that I've worked with in the Twin Cities have given me permission to do that. But it's also the same thing I tell my students, right? My major courses that I teach are composition and literature, women's studies. When we enter into the text, one of the best ways to figure out what that text means is to ask yourself, where are you positioned? And then that gives you the agency then to what? Create meaning. So just a little bit about my work, and I won't bore you too much. In my dissertation, I'm very interested in the temporalization of space and time, and these breaches, in a way, breach memory and experience, but they also work to create identity. And to give you a definition of what I mean by a breach, I mean a break, but a break that comes from an experience that can be physical or emotional or spiritual. Think about the Middle Passage, right, from Africa to the New World. That is a breach, right? There's been a break. And how does that breach impact how identities and experiences are created? Do you recognize the woman on your left? Do you remember the name Educator Turner? She was accidentally deported to Colombia. You remember that story from Texas? So in 2010, 2011, she was accidentally deported to Colombia at the age of 14. When I write about literature, I not only analyze the text as evidence of the human condition or the human experience, I also take it a step further and say that writers, particularly marginalized writers of literature, are using that text to help us understand what happens in real life. So there's a wonderful novel titled An Untamed State by Roxane Gay, who is a Haitian American writer, and it's about a woman who unfortunately is kidnapped and sexually assaulted. That is fiction, right? But Dorothy Allison, who is the author of Trash, would say, well, is fiction really fiction if it's about true feeling? So how might reading An Untamed State help us understand what happened to Educator Turner? How does someone get accidentally deported to Colombia when they are a U.S. citizen and they don't speak Spanish? And with deeper investigation, you find out that she was sex trafficked from her home. And so when she was arrested, when they asked her, you know, are you from the U.S., she might have said no because she wanted to what? Get off the streets, right? And there's a way that we can understand it. It's not to have shame or blame, but maybe Roxane Gay might be a window to understanding the very real issue of sex trafficking and what happens to women in the U.S. And at the time that happened to Educator Turner, I think Texas had the second largest rate of sex trafficking in the U.S. And unfortunately, it happens here in the Twin Cities, and it happens with my students that I teach at MCTC. But again, it's about agency and power, right? Because we all are in these situations that we inherit through no fault of our own. But how can literature be a way to help us understand and deconstruct something in order to give us agency to affect change? So in An Untamed State, yes, this horrible thing happens to the female protagonist, but she moves on. She lives. She still thrives. So then too can what? Educator Turner. She came back to the U.S. She's going to thrive. And if they can thrive, then that means what? You can thrive. All right. So I also write a lot about family. This is my great-great-grandmother and my great-great-great-uncle. And it's part of the Great Migration. So this picture is somewhere between 1930 and 1940. And I'll use a personal picture, but I'll pair it with this particular picture with James Baldwin's Hotel on the Mountain, which is a novel that is set in the 1950s in the United States. But he has to go back to the early part of the 20th century, the late part. in order to explain why what's happened to him in 1935 or 1955 is happening. And when we talk about time and space, I want to show you something really interesting. So this is 1930s, 1940s. This is my mother and my brother. When my brother graduated from his Catholic all-the-way high school. But when he graduated, there were 6 African-American men accepted in the freshman year. By the time he graduated, there were 4 young men that had died by gunshot. But you know that those are the contemporary statistics of what's happening now in Chicago, right? But again, literature, writing, narrative is a way in to understand. So when he graduated, I wrote a poem for him, and that poem was published, right? Now talk about time and space. When you juxtapose these 2 pictures, isn't that amazing? One is the first half of the 20th century. The other is the late half, almost to the turn of the century. And thinking about reading a text, but also reading history and contemporary political conditions, how much has changed and how much has remained the same. Here you have a great-grandmother and her son escaping Mississippi to escape Jim Crow because North is freedom. And on some level, they did pretty good. I have a PhD. I didn't change my last name to Mindy because I wanted my grandfather to realize that we did it. Right? So when I finished it, I could give it to him and say, yes, the legacy. But now look at my mother and my brother struggling against what? Different conditions, but similar dynamics. And for us as educators, we talk about the challenging things. How do we use this as a vehicle for discourse and to understand? Because at the end of the day, as you know, the students in front of me, they are the leaders. They are going to be the ones to change things and make things better. So part of the gift and the skill is that we have to be able to talk about it, right? In a way that reflects critical thinking and humanity and keeps everybody in the conversation. I also do consulting with Innocent Classroom, and BC is here, who is also the Director of Community Development for the Innocent Classroom. Alex Pate here, who was my mentor, and is still my mentor, but also a good friend, also now my boss. We do work around closing the achievement gap in K-12 schools. We've been doing it for 4 years. We've educated, trained over 2,000 teachers, and as you know, Minnesota unfortunately has one of the largest education achievement gaps in the nation. But in the Innocent Classroom, we don't see it as an achievement gap, we see it as a relationship gap. Because we know that students learn best from people who they believe care about them and from people who they believe love them. And that's what is here at work. I know that Miss Ferguson is right here. I know she loves my daughter and she cares about my daughter, right? Talk about values. Oh, and David Mirrors right next to me. Japanese American writer, trained Japanese, yes. You have to put on your reading list. But this is, can you imagine, like, this is my circle. These are people who mentored me. It's amazing. Relationships, connections. And also, too, I think Alex Pink has been a part of your lecture series, too. There's a picture of him, yes. So then in closing, you remember the spaghetti? So I told you that my daughter's favorite food is spaghetti. Loves it. And there's an aesthetic. I know, like when she was 4, she would eat blue cheese, and people at the restaurant couldn't believe that her palate, right? So I know, I'm not joking. So anyway, one day I think Dad is in class or working. We come home and it's just us because my 2 younger kids are much younger. There's a bigger gap. They have not yet been born. And so I fix spaghetti. It's late. I don't know what I'm thinking about. And we're sitting at the table and we're eating spaghetti. And Cheryl takes about 2 or 3 bites. And she says to me, "Mom, do you think you did your best?" And you know, I was like, wow. That's blatant. You see what I mean? We're not going to judge you. We're not going to blame you. Do you think you did the best that you could? And you know, what privilege, because of what my mother and grandparents had done, I could sit at that table right, with a PhD, with the job, being able to provide, have the intellectual space to have her intellectual space, and look at her and say, well, you know, Cheryl, you're right. Mommy didn't do her best. I'll do better next time. And then she just said, okay. And then she finished the spaghetti. Wow. In that moment, her teaching me, right? And this sense of no matter what our circumstances in the world that we have been given, what we have inherited, it is our job to do our best and then to inspire the best in others. And to me, if I could sum it up, that is what my blended experience is for me and my family, for which I'm so honored and grateful to be a part of. So I just want to say thank you. And then how do you do your best? I love this picture because it's a picture of my mother. As adults, we can look at her and see things are a little bit hard, right? But for the four of us, we're happy, right? Because she was still doing her best, always modeling that. And that's how my daughter looks when she comes home from school. That's how my 6-year-old looks when they talk about what they're doing. The love, the joy of education. And so thank you. I'm sorry, Cheryl, but I love this picture. And yeah. So any questions? Could I talk more about that achievement gap? Yes, so I'll talk a little bit about from the peripheral, from my peripheral perspective. And in my essay that's going to be published in A Good Time for Truth, the title of the essay is Disparate Impacts, Living Just Enough for the City. So Minnesota has one of the largest achievement gaps in education around equity issues, particularly at grade level. But those disparities are consistent across the board, not just in terms of education, but employment, housing, etc. And let me be clear, you know, as a nerd, it is a legacy that we have inherited, right? Because inequity is cumulative. So even if you're running a race, that race has been running for 5 years, and you don't start till 5 years later, no matter how fast you run, you're never going to get caught up. So in saying that, I also want to be responsible and say that this disparity exists around the entire country. I think what has made it such a part of the contemporary buzz discourse is that I think the assumption was that the disparity should be greater below the Mason-Dixon line, not necessarily above it. And what we're finding is that the disparities are greater above the Mason-Dixon line than below, which I think only means that we are still trying to understand this legacy of structural and historical racism that we have inherited through no fault of our own. With that said, Denison Classroom is about closing the achievement gap through thinking of it as a relationship gap. And I do believe in this philosophy because this philosophy is what I embody in my work. It's a very simple premise. If you can't change the relationship between the teacher and the student, you change that student's attitude toward education. If the student's attitude towards education changes to a positive attitude, that results in higher academic performance. And when I say student, I mean individual student. So not the Hmong student, not the black student. That would be Tai, the student who's from Chicago, whose parents are divorced. An individual relationship with that student beyond how they might show up geographically or racially in these larger macro structures. And it's not particularly politically correct to say this, but I will, because as you know, for children, time is short. I can't change what's happening outside the classroom. That doesn't mean I don't agree with it, and it doesn't mean that I can't do something on my own time. But when that student is in front of me for maybe 40 or 60 minutes a day, and I only have that student for 8 or 9 months, my goal is when that student is in the classroom with me, that student is safe, they're smart, and they have unlimited potential. And then I'm giving that student the skills in order to recognize what their good is so that they can achieve. And if you do that consistently, what you end up finding out is that then you give that student a skill to deal with things when they are challenged. So then it transfers from the teacher bearing the burden of that skill to the student embodying that. And I'll give you an example, if it's okay. So when I was in 5th grade, Catholic school, uniform, so 9 yard, religion every day, statue of the Virgin Mary outside the bathroom. And we have to have humor. My parents were divorced and things were really hard. And my job was to cook and clean. My sister, combed hair. We still fight about that now, so that's another lesson. But I was turning in sloppy work. I had a 5th grade teacher, Miss Williams. I'll never forget one day, and things change in 5th grade, right? Because it's not just lower school, it's like middle school. I turned in some biology work, clearly sloppy. Miss Williams said, Miss Coleman, will you stay after class? And she brought the paper up to me, and she put it in front of me. And she says, this is unacceptable. I know you can do better than this. I'm going to sit here with you, and you're going to do the entire thing over. And she sat there the entire time while I redid the homework, and I turned it in. Then all of a sudden, when I would come into class, if there was a change of seasons, if the classroom needed to be decorated, if something needed to be cleaned, Coleman, you do this. So she gave me a leadership position, gave me things to do, praised me, so that I didn't focus on what was happening at home. Because I knew I was smart, because she knew I was smart. And eventually that transferred over to me. So by the time I graduated from 8th grade, and this sounds so unpopular now, but when I was in grammar school, in 8th grade, we had the top 13 or the top 10, and it was so against pedagogy today, right? I was always in the top row, so I was the smart kid. And that was the transformation I made because she instilled that in me. She couldn't change what was happening at home. She couldn't change that me and my sisters would argue about food stamps, but she could say, no matter what, you're smart, and you can use that to your advantage. And so it's kind of, in a way, doing that kind of work. And doing that work without explicitly talking about, I think, race and diversity in ways that have become saturated. Because you have to ask yourself the question, we're almost, 5+ decades removed from that, and things still have not changed. So we have to find new and different ways to talk about those things. So yes, it's about supporting the teacher and developing a relationship with the student that works to close the achievement gap. We're in our 4th year at Omaha, Nebraska, and it has been successful from the feedback that we're having. This is the start of our 2nd year in the Twin Cities, so we're really excited about the work that we're doing. And ultimately, it's about the service, right? The service to community, because if we don't work to close this gap, what does that mean for our future? These are our future doctors and lawyers, policemen, firemen, teachers that are going to take care of us in our country. Yeah, so that's what we do. I know that was a long way. Was that helpful? No problem. Yes?
What is your thinking about tutoring and mentoring?
What is my thinking about? My thinking about tutoring and mentoring is that it's a good thing. I don't know specifically about the programs where it's done, but it's definitely something that worked for me. And at my age, I still have mentors, right? It was great to see Jasiel come in here today, who I see as not only my friend, but also as a mentor. So when you have mentors, that lets you know that you can do it. In 8th grade, my teacher, Charles Jones, had graduated from Yale with a degree in Russian and English composition. Don't ask how those two things go together. But he had come back to my grammar school to teach. He was my mentor. He made it possible for me to imagine that, yes, I'm going to go to college, because if he did it, I can do it. So yes, relationships are important. Because I guess you can't admit, sometimes I say, I don't think I would have gotten the job if I could say to my administrators, well, why do you do so well in class? And if I had to tell you honestly, what do you do? I love the students. But sometimes you feel like you can't say that. So when I got the teaching award, I had to write this essay. And it took me 3 days because I felt guilty. I felt like I had to lie. I couldn't admit that. But what do? You love the students. Because to me, if I teach you to love yourself, if I teach you how worthy and valuable you are, how smart you are, writing a sentence is nothing. Do you see what I mean? Once I show you how, no, you actually are smart, you do have things to say, you are valuable, I take off. And that's about the relationship. And I think that can happen in tutoring and mentoring. Yeah. And that happens here, right? Teachers come early and work with students here. Yeah. About establishing community and relationships. Because when you know someone, you can't help but take action. You treat them differently. You interact with them differently. You teach them differently if you have a real relationship with them. Yes?
Why are there not more relationships like that? Why are there not in today's system more disabilities and race? Is it the teachers that we're hiring? Is it the system that they're in that doesn't allow them to have that relationship? And maybe, I don't know how are we here, but how do we get to it?
One, that's a very good question, so let me repeat it again. So why is it a challenge to have those relationships today, and why don't we have those teachers like Ms. Williams in the system today? Again, I'm going to give my personal experience based upon my observation and the work that I do. I want to say, one, I do think those teachers are in the system, but I think maybe they're overworked. They don't have the support that they need. I think we have to change how we acknowledge teachers. I think teachers are just as important as a heart surgeon, right? So we have to change the paradigm. I also think that, and I'm going to say this gently, that the subconscious mind is stronger than what we give it credit for. And that's not my work, that comes out of Alex Pate's work in the Innocent Classroom. And when I say the subconscious mind, remember, we have almost, a 300 plus year legacy of historical and institutional racism or bias that affects how we might see people of color, how we might see sexual orientation, how we might view gender, how we might view class through no fault of our own. And sometimes it takes, what Aristotle would say, stepping away from hubris, right, or Sophocles, right, Oedipus, right, blindness. Sometimes it takes stepping away from hubris to acknowledge that maybe my subconscious mind might work more than my conscious mind. And imagine if you're in a classroom that's overloaded, you don't have enough resources, you don't have support, how you might go, just on automatic, right? But I do think when you can create environments where teachers are valued, where they are treated well, where they are supported, where they are viewed as professionals and a huge player in the education of children, I think you can have success. And again, another reason why I chose Blake. You support your teachers. They go on sabbaticals. You support them for research, right? And to me, I feel like the teacher is the team. Just think, my teacher, Cheryl's teachers see her probably more during the day than I do. So when I see her teachers, I say to them, I'm on your team. You tell me what you need me to do to support the work that you're doing. Because I completely trust that they're doing that. But that means that Blake has already established that foundation where that's the baseline of what the values are here. So I think that has to happen. Now I'll say something that probably, will keep me from getting a job. We, at least in the public school system, we're still operating on a post-World War II model, right? Where students were tracked into certain fields. And that worked. And again, it's no conspiracy. No one woke up in the morning and said, I hate Sarah and Johnny, right? It didn't happen. But we're still on that model. And we're on that model of tracking, but we don't have the jobs, right? And children are different. Paradigms have changed, so teaching has to change. Children have changed. So I also think we have to have the agency to figure out how to revamp our system so that it best serves students. And I'm sure if I could answer that question, I'd be a millionaire, but I can't. But that's what I would say. Yeah, is that helpful? Yeah. Any other questions?
You mentioned Omaha and 4 years ago, 2 years ago, is there a specific program that you're working with?
Well, it's called the Innocent Classroom, and so we're in the Minneapolis Public Schools. Right now, we're in St. Paul Public Schools. So right now, I'm in the cohort training teachers in the St. Paul Promise neighborhoods and the St. Paul Public School District. But BC, I hope you don't mind if I put you on the spot here. She is our Director of Community Development, and I would say if you have more questions about the Innocent Classroom, she would be the point person to give you that information. And we also have a website. But yes, this is our 4th year, and we've trained over 2,000 teachers. And literally, for example, in Omaha, where we're in our 4th year in those public schools, we have watched schools transition into innocent schools, so that you have a child going into kindergarten to first grade to second grade, where those teachers have been trained in an innocent classroom. And you know, a funny thing happens when you acknowledge how powerful teachers are and you put them in the center. Because once the teacher changes, it's like a domino effect. Then what? Everything else changes. So yes, that's what
Well, listen, thank you very much.
Thank
Give
you.
Something to love you and something to keep you warm. So, thank you. Thank you.
It reminds me of some of the great teachers that we all had here that loved us, and I mean, there's always the ones that stick out. And she was talking about, I was thinking about, gosh, how much I love Bob Close, and Bob Close loved me even when he pulled the Board of Education off of the wall and hit me with it, which was at least once a month, I'm sure. And especially Willie Greeley, who always got me in trouble. So anyway, we've got a couple of great speakers coming up, a special one. We don't normally meet in March, but Andy Redleaf is going to be here and join us for that.